I'm excited to talk to you about intuition today. Intuition is this idea where you're in a situation and you're able to make a decision or to notice something really quickly before you're doing any kind of intentional conscious processing. And intuition is a really fun thing to watch, especially when you see someone who's using intuition well. The problem is intuition can also be used in a way that's not so helpful, that can prevent you from discovering a truth, discovering a literal or metaphorical treasure, solving a problem, making the best decision. So I work with a colleague I did for a number of years who preceded me by decades, and he had a lot of great intuitive insight into how to make decisions in the organization. But when I would ask him why he thought we should do one thing over another, sometimes he struggled to explain to me because it was gleaned, his decision making was informed by just years and years of going through similar situations and seeing the right decision made and the wrong decision made. And while he couldn't articulate it and it wasn't something conscious for him, that pattern, that going through that cycle over and over again, he'd been able to cultivate a kind of intuition where he could just sort of notice this is the better option, you should consider this. Now, where it became really interesting, though, was I would sometimes ask him, well, why do you want to do it this way? Because I had a different opinion. And he was unable to explain it to me. And so sometimes I would start to think, well, maybe he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Maybe he doesn't really understand this. Because I was confusing this. I didn't realize at first the fact that, decades of experiencing the same thing over and over may lead to a really high level of wisdom and great decision making, even though it doesn't necessarily lead to one's ability to articulate it clearly and even articulate it or understand it to themselves, because it's happening almost on a kind of subconscious level from just repetition of experiences and positive and negative feedback. So this has led me to think more and more about how to use intuition effectively and how to avoid using it in ways that hurts my decision-making, problem-solving, and discovering those literal and metaphorical treasures. So that's what I want to do in this video. I'm going to take you through sort of 5 insights or tips that I've discovered along the way that I think you might find helpful. First one I jotted down here is this. You want to use intuition mostly. It can be most effective in familiar situations where there's not an extra reward for deciding quickly. So if there is a reward for making a decision really quickly, and it's a situation you're very familiar with and you've been through it over and over again and received that kind of feedback informally, then that's oftentimes a sign that you may be well positioned for using your intuition with some really good results. If, on the other hand, even if you're familiar with a situation, if there's no real reward to making the decision really quickly, and there's maybe a benefit to pausing, I encourage you can listen to your intuition, jot it down, make note of it, but don't let it just sort of drive you mindlessly or too quickly. Take the time, and there might be some things that you can discover and see that your intuition would not lead you to. The second one is when you're dealing with matters that involve numbers and statistics and hard data, usually intuition is not your best friend. You want to use the data and not just your gut when probability rules. And so say you buy a lottery ticket and your gut just tells you that you're going to win this thing, and you kind of get all excited about it, and you're building it up in your mind, and you have this kind of story that you're telling yourself about it, and then all of a sudden you see the results of the lottery and you didn't win, and you're kind of baffled by it because you had convinced yourself so much that you're going to win. Now, is that intuition or just wishful thinking? I guess they can get a little bit conflated sometimes. But sometimes intuition can be turned into superstition, or it can be tainted by cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And I have a whole bunch of videos on both of those if you want to check them out. But generally speaking, when probability is at play and when you're dealing with statistics and finances and so forth, you want to make sure that you keep your intuition in check and that you are testing things out by looking at the data and the reports and analyzing them and asking really good questions and getting feedback from other people, looking at it from different kinds of angles. That's when you want to get into that much more conscious, formal thinking, and you're going to get much better results most of the time than just following your intuition. Third one is you want to use intuition for pattern recognition more than trying to make predictions. So here's an example that I was trying to think of an example. I jotted this one down. Imagine a detective whose gut tells them that something's off in the room. So that's good. Pay attention to your gut. Stay a little bit longer. Look a little bit further. But you don't make the prediction. Your gut is telling you that there's some pattern that maybe you haven't consciously begun to recognize, but your gut is telling you that there's a kind of misplaced pattern or something a pattern that's broken in the space. And so you can trust that and you can look around more for a while and see if there's more. It's not going to help you. Your gut is not going to help you solve the crime or solve the clue necessarily, but it will at least prompt you to pause and do a little more work. So this is where your intuition can be a friend to your more formal conscious thinking habits and your best thinking patterns and strategies. Let your intuition tell you, hey, pause, stop, do a little bit more work, then put that intuition aside and start using the other more concrete tools. All right, next one is beware of intuition in really high stakes one-off decisions. If it is a unique situation, a novel situation, one that you haven't experienced before, and it's very emotional, and it's a high-pressure decision, and the stakes are really high, that's where you want to be really, really careful about just following your gut and following your intuition. This is where you want to switch over and start using some formal thinking, some formal problem-solving strategies, formal decision-making strategies. If you're searching for something, use that grid method or that spiraling search method. You can use lots of different tools and heuristics that where you're consciously using them to try to discover something, especially if it's high stakes. Don't just trust your instinct or your gut. Sometimes you can have that urge to do so because you get this feeling that if I just act quickly, I follow my intuition and I act quickly, I can escape this really unpleasant negative emotion that I'm feeling right now. The problem is it's probably going to lead to something worse. I'll give you an example that's a little bit embarrassing that I had years ago when I was in college. So I lived in a dorm, and the college that I attended, most of the buildings were all interconnected by hallways, but I lived in one dorm that was disconnected from the hallways. And in the winter, it got a little bit cold, and it was a little bit of a walk to the dorm. So sometimes one person would drive, and we would all get in the car, and we get on the car, including riding on the back of the car. Not recommended. And I was riding on the back of the car one day, and my fear started to kick in because the person driving decided to drive a little bit faster and thought it was funny, and the car was probably going 30 to 40 miles per hour. And I'm on the back, and I feel a kind of fight or flight type of fear that starts to come over me, and my intuition is telling me to escape. And so I quickly decide I'm just going to jump off the car, but I'm going to jump off the car running in the direction that I thought if I could run as fast as the car was going, they would counter each out and I would somehow be standing still and I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, it was decided in a split second, and I was running in the exact opposite direction that I would have needed to, and I can't run 30 to 40 miles per hour anyway. And so I simply accelerated the rate at which my body and my forearms went into the pavement, and I slid for yards and scraped off much of my forearm and fell asleep, went in shock and fell asleep and woke up over 24 hours later in my dorm room with a massive scab all over my arm and some other things like that. It was not a pleasant experience. And that was one of those situations where my emotion prompted me to have this kind of instinctual-like reaction where I wanted to just escape. And it caused me to reason in a way that was completely unreasonable. Now, in a lesser way, we can all experience that type of thing in our lives. So be really careful when you're in a high-stakes, highly emotional, or novel situation. You put those three together, and it's almost certain that intuition is not the thing you should be using. You should be moving to more formal problem-solving, decision-making strategies. And if you're struggling doing that on your own, get a partner if you can. and have them do some talking with you and talk through the best way to approach it. And then finally, the fifth one is you want to train your intuition through feedback loops. The way that intuition develops is when people experience something over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and they get feedback about what's working and what's not working. And so over time, their gut kind of tells them, that you almost get a feel for something and what's going to happen. Like athletes do this with how they hold the ball, and they get a feel for the ball and the motion, and if they move their hand in a certain way, what's likely to happen with the ball or not happen with the ball. And so there's a kind of intuition that comes into play that can be really helpful. In fact, I did some research for a number of professional associations in the healthcare field, and one of the things that I was surprised to discover that in many healthcare professions, some people peak at their healthcare skill when they get to maybe sort of that 10 to 12 or 15 year range. And yet there are some healthcare workers, especially surgeons, who seem to get better their entire life. Like they just get better and better and better and better. So a surgeon who's been doing it for 20 years is better than one who's been doing it for 10, and one who's been doing it for 30, better than one who's been doing it for 20. That's not universal rule, but I found that seemed to be a pattern. And the reason is because when you're doing surgery, you're getting feedback almost instantaneously on what worked and what didn't work. There's a lot of immediate feedback in terms of the physical sensations and everything that's happening. And that is a perfect recipe for improving your intuition and your skill over time. Your skill, more generally, objectively, but even when you're not consciously aware of it, you start to notice the sensitivities of movements and what's going to work and help and not help. And you've gone through so many different repetitions. Like some surgeons might do, 5, 10, 15 surgeries a week or more. And so they're getting all of this repetition. And so that's really true. You can train your intuition through feedback loops, but that means you have to get actual feedback. That's why I encourage people to journal their learning lessons. You try something out, what happened, what didn't happen. Write it down consciously, think about it, and build those habits of getting feedback, learning from it, and then over time, it might just work its way into something that's instinctual and helpful. So there you have it. Instincts, are they helpful? Yes. Are they harmful? Yes. It comes in to cultivating the wisdom to know when to use your intuition and when to set it aside and use something better. I hope you find this useful. I look forward to your comments.